Hello, free agency. Welcome to today's experience. We are joined by a special guest, Ziv Snai from Skydio, here to talk about all things defense tech with free agency CEO Shervin. So, with that said, take it away.
Awesome. Well, Ziv, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. Excited to share your wisdom with the crowd. And let's hop right into it because I think people are, when they're curious about this topic, the curiosity is large. And let's start with this as a mainstay. Obviously, I hope folks who have hopped on this either already know what Skydio is up to or look it up. But just like thinking about the industry, more widely, I think this is something that a lot of job seekers, folks who are laid off, or folks who are just like wondering if they should be joining a new industry, from a structural employment angle, a startup angle. It's something they're fascinated by. Do you think that's right? If you were talking to a friend who, is in the middle of a search, either whether they've been laid off or they're just thinking about what's next, and they want something that has a sturdiness to it, is defense tech one of the good options right now from your point of view?
Yes, great question, and I'll jump right into it. The short answer is yes. I'll be blunt by saying that I don't think there was any better time in the history of defense tech to join a defense tech company than it is right now. The main thing and the main reason for that is while the entire economic downturn shifts, and we can all see it with the big tech companies doing layoffs, the one constant thing, like it or not, is defense and everything around it still booms. We're seeing what's happening in Ukraine, and we're seeing what happens worldwide, which means that money is still being poured into defense companies, and it's a known thing. On top of that, a lot of investors that we can see around, which might have taken risk on various AI companies and next Google, so to speak, are shifting to being a bit more conservative. And conservative usually means defense as well, because you know that there's always going to be the next government contract that's going to be up for grabs. And as such, those companies are going to last. So definitely it is the right time to consider such a switch. There are defense tech is all encompassing. There are various positions and various degrees of what defense tech actually means. But in general, yes, I would definitely recommend.
And then, inside of that, with where defense tech sits today, one of the interesting notions that I think a lot of people in the market would be curious about, uh, the transmissibility, the interoperability of skills. And obviously we're thinking product engineering, operations, but even sales and CSM and all the sorts of functions that we have within a tech company. When you think about, if you were talking to individuals who are interested in the notion of defense tech, but almost nervous that they aren't competent in a specific way, how do you think about someone's readiness to translate into defense tech from SaaS, from CPG, DTC? When you think about the notion of the translation there, what do you think people get right or wrong about the relevance?
So another good question. I would say that, and everything I'm saying is my point of view. It doesn't mean it's the right one, but that's the way that I see it. The last, I would say, about 5 years have made a switch. There were a lot of disruptors in the industry, Skydio being one of those, that have taken what was considerably a very customer-driven or enterprise-driven companies and shifting those over to also have a federal and defense point of view. Skydio began as a company that was focusing on consumer products, shifted into enterprise as well as the federal and defense market. Those type of companies have made it so that the traits that you're currently using, that I've worked at a SaaS company, could easily be transferred into any one of those companies. That's not the old Boeing, Lockheed Martins of the world that have played around in the same way for years and years, and that's the way that they've been working, and either get on with the program or you're not going to make it. The new type of companies are much closer to what we would say is high tech than the traditional defense tech that we've seen in the past. And as such, those traits are easily transferable. You just have to make the right case and to explain how are you going to utilize the stuff that you've built. You've worked on a SaaS product. Great. Your company is also doing SaaS, even if that point of SaaS is on-premise and compartmentalized within that specific federal customer, it's still considered SaaS. You just have to make sure that your whatever employer you're interviewing for understands the skill that you're bringing to the table.
Let's get into the industry a little bit and we might circle back to thinking
Sure.
about careers and job search. But one of the interesting notions is why we are where we are today. And you mentioned some of the contract changes, some of where the geopolitics is driving some
Yep.
of this. But what do you think most? It started a few years ago. I don't know if you'd agree with that, right? Where like we started to see this boom in defense tech and the creation of companies like Anduril and others. What enabled this? Is there some technological shift that encouraged founders and VCs to really begin to get optimistic, or was it just a market sentiment shift? What do you identify?
So I would say that it's a bit of both. The main thing I would say is bringing in more tech and specifically more AI and cybersecurity into the mix. A lot of stuff that in the past were sort of you're working on defense tech in, I would say, about 5-10 years ago, would usually mean that you're working 1 or 2 generations behind from the latest tech out there. You wouldn't be working on anything which is
Mm-hmm.
cutting edge because stuff is happening in enterprise world, and then 2 years after it would make its way into defense tech and so on. So you'd always be sort of a lagger to any new technology coming in. That mind frame has shifted into I can build stuff directly into the defense tech, which are cutting edge, which involve AI, which involve sort of SaaS products within defense tech, which involves machine learning and so on, based on the fact that they're only focused on the defense use case. So that's one thing. The second is, I think, and again, my point of view, more and more companies started to realize that the defense segment, defense industry in general, have been sort of stagnant in terms of the same players playing in the same sort of sandbox over and over again. It's the same companies competing for the same contracts and keeping to themselves. And this is classical for an industry that's set up for disruption, and that's what happened when everyone is sort of set in their ways. It's easy for companies to come up saying, "Wait, we can actually do this better." I'll again use Skydio just because it's close to our as to Skydio, and I've heard our CEO mention this several times. One of the benefits of Skydio is the fact that it's building for enterprise, which sort of moves faster than the defense tech, and then can utilize the learning from enterprise, from consumer, and utilize those learning within defense tech. That's different from a lot of the big defense companies who are only focusing year over year on working on projects which have 5 year down the stream until they can actually make any money of those. So those are the two main things that I think caused the shift.
It's interesting you bring up this idea of sharing the insights because enterprise facing or also consumer facing. When you think about solutions, and you also mentioned that in the past, it's almost like everything happened in consumer and 2 years later in defense tech. Are we going to see a little bit of the reversion back to, I think, what caused the initial boom in tech? If you talk about the initial creation of Silicon Valley, it was a lot, driven by military innovation, defense tech innovation, and then brought to consumer and B2B use cases. Is this almost a resurgence of that mindset? Are we going to see, because of the changing economy, consumer demand, that like actually the people willing to pay and see this will wind up being more looking like the government than like, either a consumer or a casual B2B business?
So it's a great question. I honestly don't know. I would call out something. So one of the units within the DoD is DIU, which sits here in Silicon Valley, and that's the Department Innovation Unit, if I'm not mistaken, is the acronym. Their main focus is to take enterprise companies who are not the defense companies of the world, and try to see if they can incentivize those into joining and working under the concept of working for DoD. And they're doing anything from starting with satellites through submarines to clean energy to drones. So they're all encompassing, and they've got a lot of projects going around. That's what I see moving into the future happening more and more. So companies who were not defense companies in the past, shifting to working both in defense as well as in tech. You would see a lot of companies in the future, I think, would all sort of branch out, would have a segment that they're all in, which is just focused on defense. In some cases, there might be a complete new branch just because of confidentiality and classified information that needs to be worked on and then segregated from the rest of the company. as well as keep working and making money from enterprise and consumers. That's where I see the future going into.
When you think about the notion of being in product or engineering in these environments, how complicated is it to a defense tech or a broadly hardware driven enterprise security company to be innovative? And I don't mean that like, your answer here obviously is not going to be something like, well, we're not innovative. It's something like, how much are you driven almost by what the use case is, or something that feels very tangible inside, a real world scenario versus thinking 5-10 years in the future? And some of this might have to do with what you're talking about in terms of what's being encouraged by some of these departments and agencies. But is it hard to have a long-term roadmap because you're trying to fulfill kind of the tomorrow necessary dream?
So I would say that this is sort of the downside of startups in general. You, in a lot of cases, thinking about the 5-year down the road kind of thing, meaning that you won't be able to sell tomorrow to create more runway for the company. So we always have to think about what our customers need right now and what can we do in order to ship right now. That said, we're in it for the long game, which means that in some cases we would have to always look. It's always sort of a delicate combination of I'm building stuff that could be used right now, but wait, what would you guys need in 5 years? Let's start working on that on the background. I do see more and more contracts and more companies building towards short term than it was in the past for long terms. In my past, somewhere in a past decade, I was working for Elbit Systems, which is the biggest homeland security company in Israel. Most of the projects I worked over there were projects that from the second we interacted with the customers, we knew that we were going to ship about 3 years into the future is going to be the first product out the door. I'm seeing less and less of those contracts this day and age, which from a product point of view, that makes me happy because products are all about shipping. Let's get stuff out the door. Exactly. So it makes me happy, but at the same time, I do see this as a shift. There will always be the type of projects that are long lasting. Anything around satellites, for example, just because of the cost of a mistake, would be something that's going to be, yes, we're starting to discuss now, but we're thinking about launching only 2 or 3 years into the future.
How does someone evaluate, and let's take a multi-angle view here, a company like this, and I'd say both as a consumer when it is consumer facing, as an investor, and I know you're not necessarily an investor, you might be, I don't know, we don't need to know, but an investor in this space. And then let's take the point of view of a careerist who's evaluating. When you think about defense tech, one of the challenges I assume that happens is you're definitely not the user, so you lack the ability to have the user empathy you might have. You definitely can't play with these products that often, so you lack that you might have even in a B2B use case. So what are the metrics, the interesting notions that you would evaluate being at a company that's successfully penetrated the space and say, hey, here are some hints that actually you can see from the outside when you're looking at a company?
Sure. Then I'll start with the inside. How do you actually make it work? And then I'll jump for the outside. Yeah. The inside, I agree with you that it's very difficult because I'm not running in the middle of a battlefield right now, flying drones. At the same situation, we do try, and I see this across the defense industry in general, to bring in either solution engineers or people that have some sort of segment experience, that have done so in the past and can say, when you're running in the middle of nowhere, you need to make sure that you're under 5 pounds because that's what you can carry in your backpack. You need to make sure that those are the dimensions, that those are the capabilities that you need, and you rely on those. You're interacting with your customer as much as you can. Again, because before joining Skydio, I was working for Amazon, and before that in Google and Android. I'm an Android user, so a lot of the pain points that my customers were feeling, I've experienced myself. Not the same when it comes to building a drone for the US for the US Marines, for example. So I'm speaking a lot with the customers and understand their pain points, and then trying to create a solution as innovative as I can. Looking from the outside, as you said, what does that mean? It means that you would have to look at a company and try to see, is that company set for success? Meaning, is the company the sort of company that has a deep enough grain into that federal segment, for example, in the US? Does it have people that understand the lingo? Coming in and working on working with our federal segment, I've spent about a month or so just learning the long list of acronyms that the US military is using. Someone who has this sort of ingrained in them would have an easier time. So that's one of the key indicators that you would love to see. Second is, again, customer obsession. Is that company is a company that just focusing on solving the customer pain point right now? Or are they building a customer that they think is a cool, great customer that their engineering team is saying, yes, that shit is insane, but nobody's ever going to use it because it doesn't serve a need for any one of our defense customers.
How does the obsession come across to the outsider? I mean, maybe as an example here, it does feel true to me that, let's say, Anduril is a company I'm going to use here, does feel very customer obsessed because Palmer's going out to Ukraine and he's good at giving tours of a lot of his work, and he's doing podcast tours as well, right? So there's a sense of demonstration. But if it's not that explicit, because I think they're one of the few companies that are as loud as they are, when it's not that explicit, how would you identify customer obsession when it comes to defense tech companies?
So that's great. Ukraine was the example that I was about to use as well. As someone, I'll give you my personal anecdote. When Ukraine blew up and everything, when the Russian-Ukraine war started, we shifted drones into Ukraine to be used by the Ukraine army. I immediately jumped on a call with people in the Ukraine sitting in bunkers, trying to understand, wait, you're currently using various drones out there. What are some of the stuff that you're seeing? They gave me feedback. We pretty much put aside everything that we were then working on and said, okay, our usually release cycle is somewhere around 3 months. We need to make a release within 2 weeks because we have some problems in Ukraine that we haven't seen anywhere in the past. We need to solve those now. That's a great indicator, but again, at the same time, this is not something that's easily seen from the outside, as you said.
Yeah.
The marker that I would look from the outside for sort of customer obsession is to speak with customers. And that sounds weird, so to speak, but whenever I'm speaking with sort of potential customers, or even when I'm trying to hire someone, I tell them how great Skydio is. I say, but you know what? I'm a bullshitter. I've got skin in the game. I want you to join. I want you to be my customer. Go speak with one of my customers, and I'm be more than happy to give you a long list of customers. Go ask them. If they'll come to you and they would say, yes, this company is they've got skin in the game. They're working with us. They're making our needs their top priority. That's the company that you, as an investor, would love to focus on, as a recruit would love to work for, and so on and so on. I hope that answer the question.
That makes sense. Here's an interesting nuance of it, right? Which is this customer obsession you also have to be okay with. One of the interesting things, I think the three of us on this call fall under a similar worldview of defense tech is a good thing for the world, and I've justified it in different comments and Twitter debates I've gotten into in my own way, where it probably sounds similar to yours around we must fight good fights, and the challenge is you have to vote and be in countries and do the work of finding what the good fight is, and that's hard.
Yep.
But there's no other option, and it's in fact virtuous if you believe you found a good fight. But people are pretty resistant to this, right? And they I've seen comments where it's just kind of they go, no, right? That's still bad. You're still bad for thinking it. To some extent, it just might be a dumb opinion they have that no one is ever going to convince them out of. But have you found, has Skydio found, has any peer of yours found a way to talk to the tech worker who doesn't understand that we just don't have anything other than ourselves to trust and kind of do this work for?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll start by saying that I share your point of view of the work. And as such, I've been working both, as I said, in Elbit in the past, as well as Skydio right now. And I believe that we're doing the good fight, so to speak. I would never work for a company which I'm think that I would put as to working on the wrong side of the map or selling to anyone that is not someone that I want the system that I'm working on be shared with. That said, there will always be a lot of people that would always look at defense tech and would say, nope, we should not do anything. We should not invest or do anything that that will go into the battlefield. My point of view, I'm never going to argue with those type of people. If that's your core belief, great. That's a valid belief. Don't come work for defense tech.
Right.
I would never try to persuade an employee that said, well, you guys, I love what you guys are doing, but I don't think that we should build anything that goes into war. I would be, okay, I wish you the best of luck, and I would be more than happy to assist you in anything down your career path. I don't think that this is the right place for you. If you're going to wake up each and every morning saying, I hate the fact that I'm building stuff that is doing X, Y, and Z, then by all means, don't do it. And that's the way that I see things. And again, it's a valid approach, one that I'm not sharing, but it's a valid approach.
One more on this notion of, again, job search career, and then I'm going to switch back to industry. Is there a sense to which people should be, who join defense tech companies and talk about what they should be willing to accept, what they should be optimizing for, that they should also be people who are looking for, harder environments? And the example, when you talked about Ukraine and the 2-week shipping time that had to adjust from, a roadmap that was a little bit more lenient, there was a sense to which it was a call to action. Do you think people shouldn't join defense tech if, I think for agency, we're in the mission of slotting people into the careers that are right for them. And for some people, they want their career to fit into a nice box and be a certain portion of their lives. From other people, that is their life. Do you actually have a perspective on, how people should evaluate defense tech as it relates to what sort of worker they are?
So I don't think that there's any difference in that between defense tech or any high tech whatsoever. In every job that you're going to do, there's always going to be sort of a crunch time. The company is at stake right now, and you need to pull in a all-nighter just to make sure that things are working. And at the same time, I would say that there are a lot of items within defense tech that are so long-lasting, and so we're building this stuff. It's going to be used sometime in the future. No rush, build it. Those are the tests that you've got. Let us know when you're done, so to speak. The main thing, and that's one of the things that drive me when it comes to defense tech, is that higher purpose, the higher mission. I want to work at companies which I believe are doing good in the world. I believe that working, again, on defense tech, on the right side of defense tech, does good in the world. So as such, it gives me the motivation for something like Ukraine happening to say, you know what, despite the fact that I love I'm all in for work-life balance, and I think that that's critical. I would say for that period of time, I'm okay with saying I'm going to give up some of my sort of personal time just to do the work, not because the bottom line of Skydio is what's important for me. In most cases, like the Ukrainian one, the bottom line of Skydio didn't move an inch because there was no profit in that. But you believe that you're doing good, and as such, the motivation to do the extra work comes up sort of natural.
Switching back to industry, what's interesting right now in the space other than Skydio, right? Let's get non-greedy. Skydio is super interesting, and I'll say that for you. What do you find fascinating?
Then I'm an Israeli, so I have to say cybersecurity. It sort of comes with the territory of everything that we've been building for. So there are a lot of cybersecurity companies out there in terms of growing at scale, as well as paying top dollar for employees. That's very interesting, especially because cybersecurity was always sort of on the mind for defense tech, but the main thing is, wait, you're letting someone like a third-party company access sort of the infrastructure of defense was always sort of, I'm not sure if I want to do so. And we're seeing more and more openness in order to get this pushed through the door. So that's one thing. Other than that, anything around, and Skydio falls into that, but I'm not speaking about drone specifically, but in general, autonomous behavior is something that at least I'm very passionate about, and I think that's only going to drive more and more adoption as the industry move forward. You can see this in pretty much any vehicle out there, from land, from ground vehicles, all the way to, we've got unmanned submarines out there. And anything around that area is only going to work more, and autonomy is what's driving that. More and more capabilities of stuff that's are on the edge, figuring things out without even a person in the loop, up to a point where a person just is sort of an overseeing of everything going on with a kill switch if things are not going the way that they want. those are the kind of stuff which I think are only gonna sweep through the industry and are interesting to work on right now.
Are there defense tech trends that you would recommend people and types of companies avoid? And I don't mean from a super negative angle. You might have companies you don't like, but I mean from the angle of like, if you're talking about modernity, if you're talking about someone who wants to be on the cutting edge, is there a type where you go, hey, this is something where the solution is actually quite simple or found out? This is less about product development and more about product maintenance. Are there some counter trends within, the set of defense tech companies in the world?
Nothing really comes to mind. Like, this is a company that I would not go and work for,
Right.
like the type of company that I not want to go and work for. I do believe that as we'll move forward, the big traditional tech companies of the world are still going to be there. I'm not saying that tomorrow Lockheed is going to fire 50% of their workforce. But at the same time, I do think that they're going to see more and more competition coming in. And as such, they won't grow and expand the way that they've done so before. I would also say, if you're someone who's looking for either fast career growth, or just want to be passionate about the work you're doing, thinking about that you're working cutting edge, I would deprioritize the traditional big tech companies just because they're sort of set in their ways. And that's not something specific against them. You can see this in pretty much any technology across every industry. Big tech companies eventually sort of become stale and disruption comes in, and then it's either innovate the company or slowly die. It's always, as Amazon say, it's always day one at Amazon just because of that specific issue in order to try and keep innovating and not falling behind.
One of the interesting notions about the industry is this idea of that hardware-software mixture existing. Obviously, not in all areas, but even cybersecurity in a lot of cases in defense tech has to do with hardware. Going back a little bit to that theme of what's necessary for a person to be in this space. How much is defense tech just a proxy for hardware? Obviously there's hardware that's just like D2C, CPG stuff, but like I'm talking like, is it in some ways like, are Tesla and Skydio more alike than not alike in terms of what the product development process looks like and what people are building internally?
Yeah, so I haven't worked for Tesla, but from what I know, I would say it's more similar than differentiated.
Right.
Again,
it's more similar than like the Skydio and Brex.
Yeah, exactly. The same, like we're working agile, just like any other tech company on the consumer or enterprise world is. We're doing sprints. Everything is working pretty much the same. Like, remove the title of defense, and you wouldn't know that that's what we're currently building. The only places where it becomes, I would say, a bit more difficult to develop within the defense industry is, again, the stuff that you mentioned before about getting direct customer feedback and understanding what's going on. For example, working in Amazon or working in Google in the past, I used to get metrics about what my customer is doing. I would have known, wait, the customer has been using the apps that we're building or the phone that we're currently designing for 15 hours a day, and those are the metrics of usage, and that's where we add bugs and so on. When you're thinking about currently about my federal customers, they're offline. I'm not seeing anything. I might get a second-hand feedback from them as to this is what we've experienced. But as a product manager, a lot of the times you want to say, thank you for that input. I want to look at the data. And in a lot of cases, I don't have access to that data. So that is one of the differentiating factors between working on defense and working on anything else.
Yeah. Would you recommend people, in general, get exposure to kind of a hardware software startup at some point if you're just advising, let's say, an early career product person? Is this something that, I often tell people as an example when I tell them, okay, to build a good product career, I say marketplaces are a great thing to join because you have the two-sided customer problem. The challenges are really sticky. Pricing is complicated. So you learn so much. Is there a sense to which we should add to that list? Work for marketplace, then work for a hardware software company.
I tend to agree with what you're saying. I'll be a devil's advocate here for a second. Yeah. You want to make sure that you're not spread too thin across a lot of different aspects.
Yeah, absolutely.
You want to make sure. I've had a lot of potential candidates that applied for positions which I was the hiring manager. That when I looked at the resume, I said, well, he's done a bit of that and a bit of that and a bit of that, but like, what what drives that person? What are the core capabilities that he or she are bringing to the table, and what is it they want to do? If they've done a bit of everything, I can say, wait, in my line of work, are they going to be excited, or is that just another sort of notch on their belt as to I've crossed off the hardware software kind of approach? So I would say that as long as you're a junior in your career and you want to experiment and see what is the stuff that you're passionate about, by all means, go and work for a hardware software company and see if it's actually something that you're enjoying. It might be the case that you would say, oh, that's definitely not the way to go for me. Let's steer away from that in my career. Or it might be the other way around. But as long when you mature, again, making those switches, I wouldn't say that that's going to be a killer for any application that you're going to do, but you would have more explaining to do as if and when you're going to cross the threshold of the recruiter.
This is going to be a weird question. I don't even know how to form it.
Sure.
There's drone racing, which I see on my TikTok feed all the time. It's fun to watch. If you're talking about, the interesting startups in the consumer area, and again, we're not talking specifically about Skydio, but like, is there something from an industry and trend perspective you'd say is interesting or even not interesting about plays in, either, I guess we all call all of that consumer, like, is there something that is overrated, overhyped about some of these use cases or some of the companies building in the consumer use case?
Not sure I fully understand the question. Do you mean, are we seeing a lot of buzzwords coming in from the consumer area?
And I guess, like, knowing what you know about it all, do you go, some of these are already baked, DJI will do what DJI will do, and that's it.
Yep.
Or is there a lot of opportunity right now in the consumer area?
Oh, so yeah, now I get what you're saying. Yeah. There's definitely a lot. I'll give you another drone company, an Israeli drone company that's sort of taken I'm a gamer and I love like playing games. They're called Extend. They give you like a VR headset to fly drones, and they're doing an exceptional job.
I think I've seen this. It's like a realistic map.
Yep, an exceptional job in putting their product ahead. They've won several contracts, and again, it requires no experience, and it was built to the average Joe, so to speak, and could easily then be used by anyone in the battlefield. It goes across the industries in various positions. There are a lot of things that we're building and easily transferable. That said, just like any other industry, there are a lot of buzzwords that have been thrown around. Like every other startup that is focusing on defense right now is saying, oh, we're working on something which has AI in. Well, great. Is AI actually making a difference in the product and the problem that you're trying to solve for?
AI is just the nickname. It's the acronym of one of their...
Exactly. That's what I said. It's a buzzword that they're throwing around so they can get investors to buy in.
Yeah.
Does it actually make sense? In a lot of cases, no. In some cases, yes. Depends on the situation. So I would avoid from using the buzzwords and actually look at the problem statement and what it is that they're doing to solve
it. You might not have thought too deeply about this, but just in case, I think everyone would be super curious to hear it from your perspective as now someone so deep in the industry. What's a request for a startup you'd have? Like, if you think about an area that Skydio isn't attacking and you haven't seen attacked yet, but you go, in defense tech, there's an opportunity that someone hasn't approached, and also isn't confidential.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about something that I haven't thought to say, wait, you know what, I'm going to leave Skydio and go immediately build that one. But in general, I'm trying to think. And
even if it's a theme, maybe it's a theme, of an area that you think will be growing fast, even if it's multiple companies.
So I would say that anything around, actually, nothing really comes to mind that I can share, like, and give.
But autonomous movement sounds like one. Is that something that you think like a lot more?
It is, and we're seeing more and more traction around that. And again, autonomous across every known area that you can think of. It is something that's growing. It's already there. It's not something that I'm saying in 5 years is going to be a thing. We're already seeing traction and more movement to that. At the end of the day, taking the person out of the equation is where everything is moving to. We don't want to risk a soldier when we can put a machine, is the way that we're going to see the next battlefield happening. And anything that you can build up to that, would be beneficial. We can see, I've seen helicopters that have removed the pilot from the helicopter and are becoming sort of a drone helicopter in order to do evacs and supplies and stuff like that currently are done with an helicopter pilot flying under fire into the battlefield. So anything around that area is only going to progress in my point of view.
That's amazing. Jonathan, do we have questions from the audience?
Does not look like we do.
Ziv,
I don't know if that means that I'm interesting or very boring. I'll take the interesting.
We didn't have any last time either, and I think everyone found the person interesting. So don't sweat it. What's something that you'd say in general about the industry that I haven't asked about? Anything that comes to mind from an industry perspective that you think isn't obvious to people right now?
Yeah, I would say that working in the federal space, there will be a lot of cases in which one citizenship question is going to be brought up. And that's something that we should not hide away from. A lot of people that I've seen, I'm not a US citizen, I'm a US green card holder. I've seen a lot of candidates who immediately came to the notion, wait, I can't work for any defense company because I'm not a US citizen. Far from it. First of all, there's the concept of US person. If you're a green card holder, in most cases, you can work on anything as long as it's not considered classified, you should be good. A lot of the companies are building stuff for defense which are not classified, and then not even being a US person, just having authority to work in the US is good enough. So I've seen a lot of people, a lot of friends who've been looking around and said, oh, I'm immediately blocking out companies that are working on defense because I'm on an H-1B. That shouldn't be the case. And I would definitely advise people to also look at what project that company is doing, because in a lot of cases, it shouldn't be a blocker to start speaking and be upfront with your recruiter to see if that actually makes sense for that specific company. Other stuff that we haven't mentioned that I think are important are something that we're seeing currently in the industry in general. And again, this is my personal point of view. I've heard, I think it was one of the generals in the Air Force and within the Pentagon, saying something that I think is only going to go and be more prevalent as we move forward. It's time for the US to pick the winners. And I'll explain what that means. That's the direct quote. It means that for a long time, the DoD has been there are a lot of startups out there. We're going to work with some, work with another, make sure that everyone gets a little piece of the pie in order for them to grow. Given the fact that the US is willingly or unwillingly in direct competition with other things happening with China, it's that point where I think the DoD is going to consolidate, saying that's the biggest player within that specific segment and the specific product that we're building for. We're going to go all in with that company because we want to make sure that they're successful enough in case tomorrow something happens with China. We have our sort of in-house capabilities within the US to go and build those type of things. So I would, while startups might be appealing right now, make sure that those have enough runway and that you can actually work with them in the future. And the last point that I would make with regards to important trends within the industry are NDAA. If NDAA doesn't say anything to you, it means basically built and manufactured within the US or US authorized. More and more contracts within the defense space, at least within the US, are going to be NDAA dependent. Meaning that, for example, one of the reasons you mentioned DJI before, DJI are not allowed to sell for the federal government anymore because they're not NDAA compliant. Nice. This opens the door for a lot of other companies. And I only see this becoming more and more strict, not only in defense, but also within municipalities, state law enforcement, and anything like that, are also sort of bridging towards, yes, we need to work on something.
TMSC, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So keep that in mind that you want to, built in the US would gain more and more traction as we move forward, in my point of view.
That's a great point. That's a fantastic point. Well, Ziv, this has been a super fascinating conversation. If people are curious, where should they find you online to hear more about you, maybe poke at you a little more?
My LinkedIn is available. Just look for Ziv Snai. As far as I know, I'm the only one. Then reach out to me and I'll be more than happy.
Me too. You and I are unique in that. That very few people can. I'm sure we can find another Jonathan Goldberg. Sorry, Jonathan.
No worries. I am going to jump in and say that there was one question that came through during that last part. So, Ziv, if you have a couple minutes,
Sure.
it is an interesting one because it asks about you. So our viewer noticed that you worked at a very high level in the IDF, and she wanted to know if you could talk about sort of what you observed about operational excellence at scale there, so the training, the perspectives, and the teachings that civilians may be able to take away from that.
Sure, it's a great question. I would say if I would have to look like at I always say when people ask me about some of my military experience and what do I take from that into civilian life. The main thing that I would say one and a half things. One, the F point is stuff that we've discussed before is the mission driven. Working in the IDF, I did it like most for people who don't know, every Israeli citizen has to serve for 3 years in the Israeli army. I served for 6 because I believed in the mission and that's something that I wanted to do. That's why I went to officer school and became a captain. That mission driven is something that I'm looking into each and every company that I've worked in ever since. I want to work for a company that said that does good, at least in my point of view. That's the F point. The one point that you can take from working in the military scene into civilian life is feedback oriented. I usually say that I'm a feedback freak whenever I'm speaking with people. I enjoy feedback. I have very thick skin, and I see feedback as the only way to improve. It's something that a lot of people throw it out there. Yes, I'm very feedback oriented and I want to get feedback. But the second that you're giving them any negative feedback, they immediately sort of go into a ball and go into a fetal position and immediately they're just shut out. That's the wrong approach. Take feedback and it goes both ways. It's important to know how to give feedback, but take feedback as a way to improve yourself and do better the next time. I'm always telling any one of my employees, I'm okay with you guys messing up and fucking up and making mistakes. As long as you can learn from that, sit down, debrief, understand what you've done wrong, don't do it again, perfect. You've got my full support. And that's the main thing that I would say. How did that answer the question?
That was a good one.
It sounded awesome to me.
What you said about feedback that resonated. Find people who don't turn into the ball.
Yep.
Amazing. Well, Ziv, once again, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate you sharing the insights. For folks who want to follow what he has to say, find him on LinkedIn.
Perfect. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for having me.